9 tanks, 12 fighting vehicles, 120 soldiers. That's what Captain H.R. McMaster had on the afternoon of February 26, 1991, when his scouts crested a ridge in the Iraqi desert and found an entire Republican Guard armored brigade waiting on the other side. By any normal military math, this shouldn't have been close. The Iraqis outnumbered him roughly 5-1. They were dug in, with prepared positions and interlocking fields of fire, backed by Soviet-built tanks that had terrified NATO planners for 2 decades. 23 minutes later, McMaster's 9 tanks had destroyed more than 30 enemy vehicles. Not one American tank was lost to enemy fire. To understand how 9 crews beat a brigade, you have to understand what they were sitting inside of. And to understand that, you have to go back almost 20 years earlier, to a tank that never got the chance to fail the way everyone expected it to. In the early 1970s, the U.S. Army was still fielding the M60, a tank built for a war that increasingly looked outdated. Soviet armor was getting faster, better protected, and more heavily armed every year, and American planners were running out of confidence that their existing fleet could survive a European battlefield. So in 1972, Chrysler Defense was handed a mandate: build something that could take a hit from Soviet armor and keep fighting. Build something the crew could trust with their lives. That mandate produced the XM-1, later renamed for General Crichton Abrams, a commander who'd led American armor in 2 wars and understood better than almost anyone what a tank crew actually needed to survive combat. Production began in 1979. The tank entered service the following year. Nobody knew yet whether it would work. What the engineers built was, on paper, unlike anything the Army had fielded before. Most tanks of that era ran on diesel engines, loud, heavy, and slow to respond. The Abrams got something closer to a jet engine bolted into a tank hull, a multi-fuel gas turbine that could run on diesel, gasoline, or the same jet fuel used by Army helicopters. That flexibility mattered more than it sounds. In a war zone, you don't always get to choose what fuel shows up on the supply truck. The Abrams could drink almost anything and keep moving. That engine also gave the tank a sound nobody in armored warfare had heard before. Instead of the growl of a diesel, the Abrams produces a high, jet-like whine, distinctive enough that soldiers during a 1980s training exercise in Europe nicknamed it Whispering Death. Quiet compared to the tanks it replaced, fast enough to catch infantry off guard, and unmistakable once you know what you're listening for. Speed was part of the design from day one. A tank that weighs nearly 70 tons has no business accelerating like a sports car. But the Abrams can go from a standstill to 20 miles an hour in about 6 seconds, and push past 40 miles an hour on a road. On a modern battlefield, speed isn't about winning a race. It's about not being where the enemy last saw you. But none of that mattered if the tank couldn't see the enemy first. And that's where the Abrams changed the entire logic of tank warfare. Iraqi gunners at 73 Easting were looking through daylight optics into a haze of dust and heat, straining to spot American vehicles that were still miles away. Abrams crews were looking through thermal sights that turned that same haze into a clear picture of engine heat and metal, regardless of the hour or the weather. The Abrams could identify and destroy a target in total darkness at ranges of 2,500 meters. And against the T-72s Iraq was fielding that day, it could open fire from as far as 3,500 meters out, well before the enemy crew even realized they were being watched. That's the first rule of tank warfare nobody puts on a recruiting poster. The tank that sees first wins first. Everything else is a formality. Seeing the enemy is only half the equation, though. You still have to hit them, and hitting a target from 2 miles away, from inside a 60-ton vehicle rocking over open desert, sounds like it should be nearly impossible. This is where the fire control system earns its reputation. The Abrams uses a stabilized gun, meaning the barrel holds steady on target even while the tank itself is bouncing across rough terrain at speed. The gunner ranges the target with a laser. A ballistic computer accounts for wind, temperature, and the curve of the earth, and the gun corrects itself automatically. A trained crew can hit a moving target while moving themselves in the time it takes to read this sentence out loud. So the old rhythm of tank combat, 2 vehicles slowly closing distance while gunners walked their shots in and hoped for a lucky hit, simply didn't happen at 73 Easting. The Iraqi crews never got that chance. American shells were finding them from a distance. Most of them couldn't fire back across with any accuracy at all. Now step inside, because the tank's real secret isn't only what it can do to the enemy. It's what happens to the 4 people inside when something goes wrong, because eventually, something always does. The Abrams carries composite armor first developed in Chobham, England. Layers of steel and ceramic engineered to defeat both armor-piercing rounds and the shaped charge warheads carried by rocket-propelled grenades. Later models added depleted uranium into the turret armor itself, a material dense enough to shrug off hits that would tear straight through steel alone. But armor was only ever the first layer. The engineers who designed this tank assumed that eventually, on some battlefield, a round would get through. So they built the inside around that assumption instead of pretending it would never happen. Ammunition sits separately from the crew compartment, sealed behind blast doors, with panels built to blow outward if the rounds inside ever detonate. Instead of that explosion venting into the crew, it vents up and away through the roof of the tank. An automatic fire suppression system can detect and smother a fire inside the crew compartment faster than any human could react. And the entire crew compartment can be sealed and pressurized against chemical or biological weapons, pushing clean air out through every seam so nothing toxic gets in. This is why, when the shooting stopped in the Gulf War, the number that stunned military analysts wasn't how many Iraqi tanks had been destroyed. It was this: no Abrams tank was destroyed by enemy tank fire during the entire war. Several were struck directly, including hits from Iraqi T-72 rounds. None suffered a fatal penetration of the crew compartment. If you've ever wondered why American tank crews talk about their vehicle with something close to affection, that's why. It's not just a weapon. It's built on the premise that 4 people should be able to walk away from things that would kill the crew of almost any other tank on Earth. Inside, though, none of this feels like a marvel of engineering. It feels like a job, and a cramped one. 4 people share a space roughly the size of a small closet, sometimes for days at a stretch. The commander sits highest, with the best view and the responsibility for everyone below him. The gunner sits just under him, eyes locked to a sight, hands on controls that can put a round on target from over a mile away. The loader works the breech by hand, hauling 40-pound shells and slamming them home again and again, sometimes under fire, sometimes in 110-degree heat with the hatches sealed. And the driver lies nearly flat at the front of the hull, steering 60-plus tons of steel through terrain that was never built to carry it. They train together for years before most of them ever see combat, because in a space that small, half a second of hesitation from any one of them can be the difference between a clean shot and a dead crew. loading around, calling a range, adjusting for wind. None of it happens in isolation. Every action inside that hull depends on the person next to you doing their job exactly right, exactly on time. That's the part a specs sheet never captures. A tank isn't dangerous because of its armor or its gun. It's dangerous because of 4 people who've drilled the same movements 10,000 times until they can run them half asleep, in a sandstorm, under fire, without a wasted motion. The tank has kept evolving since 73 Easting, because the threats it faces have too. Later variants traded the original 105mm gun for a 120mm smoothbore cannon with greater range and penetration. Armor packages improved with each generation. Reactive armor and slat cages were added for urban fighting, where the danger comes less from other tanks and more from a soldier with a rocket launcher hiding 2 streets over. And active protection systems now exist that can detect an incoming missile and destroy it in mid-air before it ever reaches the hull. Something that would have sounded like science fiction to the crews at 73 Easting. What hasn't changed is the basic bet the Army made back in the 1970s. Give a crew of 4 the ability to see first, shoot first, and survive almost anything the enemy throws back. And you don't just build a tank. You build the deciding factor in a fight before it even starts. That bet gets tested constantly, and not just in the desert. In dense urban terrain, where enemies can pop out from windows and alleyways at close range, the same advantages that make the Abrams dominant in open country get harder to use. Thermal sights and long-range gunnery matter less when the threat is 30 feet away and hidden behind a wall. That's part of why the tank keeps changing. Every war exposes a new weakness, and every new version tries to close it before the next war finds it first. We cover stories like this every week, breaking down the machines and the people behind modern military power. If that's the kind of thing you find yourself falling down a rabbit hole over, subscribe, because there's a lot more where this one came from. 9 tanks against a brigade sounds at first like a story about odds. It's really a story about a decade of engineering decisions, hundreds of hours of crew training, and a tank built on the assumption that survival isn't luck. It's design. So here's the question worth sitting with. Was the outcome at 73 Easting decided by the courage of the men inside those 9 tanks? Or was it decided years earlier on a drafting table in Michigan, long before anyone pulled a trigger? Maybe it was both, but only one of those things can be built ahead of time. And on February 26, 1991, that's exactly what showed up on the battlefield first.